Charlotte was 47 years old when the forest became the center of her life. Her cabin sat at the very edge of the tree line, far enough from town that no traffic reached her, but close enough to the woods that the sound of wind in the branches felt like a daily visitor. She lived alone, and she had lived that way for several years. Solitude didn't trouble her. If anything, it steadied her. Most mornings began the same way. Charlotte stepped outside with a warm cup of tea, breathed in the cool air, and followed the narrow footpath into the forest. The trail had become familiar to her, each bend, each fallen log, each place where sunlight broke through. She walked slowly, not in a hurry, letting the calm settle deep in her chest. After decades of working as a nurse, surrounded by noise, movement, and constant urgency, she had come to appreciate the quiet more than anything else. During her afternoons, she tended to her small garden behind the cabin. The work was simple: pulling weeds, watering the soil, tying up a tomato vine that leaned too far. In the evenings, she sat by the window with a book, listening to the distant calls of night birds. Those sounds reminded her she wasn't entirely alone. The forest, in its own way, had become her companion, but there was something else too. Something unspoken. Every time she walked deeper into the trees, she felt a faint pull, an old memory that tugged at her, even though she never spoke of it aloud. Something had happened in those woods years ago. Something she carried quietly, like a secret folded away, and although her life had grown calm again, the forest had not forgotten, and neither had she. It was a crisp morning when Charlotte first noticed the sound. She had been walking the familiar trail along the creek, her boots crunching lightly on the frost-covered leaves. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, and the sunlight filtered gently through the branches. Everything seemed ordinary until she heard it, a faint, pitiful cry coming from behind a thicket. At first, she thought it might be a trapped animal. She paused, straining her ears. The sound was weak, desperate, almost human in its sorrow. Cautiously, she stepped closer, parting the underbrush. And then she saw them. 3 tiny creatures huddled together, shivering and trembling. Their fur was dark and coarse, their eyes wide with fear. They were small, fragile, and utterly defenseless. Charlotte's breath caught in her chest. She had never imagined she would encounter anything like this. In her quiet forest, the creatures moved slightly when she approached, instinctively pressing closer to each other. Their tiny hands reached out, unsure, grasping at the ground, at each other, at nothing. Charlotte knelt carefully, keeping her voice low and soothing. She could see the hunger in their eyes and the weakness in their legs. One of them tried to stand but collapsed immediately, letting out a small, plaintive whine. Another curled into a ball, trembling with cold. The third sat up slowly, staring at her with a cautious curiosity, as if trying to understand who she was. Charlotte's heart tightened. Their mother was nowhere in sight. How long had they been alone? How had they survived this long? She felt a surge of urgency and compassion. She knew she couldn't leave them here. For a moment, she simply watched them, letting them sense her presence was safe. Then she made a decision, one that would change her life forever. She would take them home. She would protect them. And somehow, she knew this small act of care was the beginning of something far greater than herself. The forest seemed to hold its breath as Charlotte gently reached out to the trembling little creatures. Beginning the first step in a bond that would last for years, Charlotte's hands shook slightly as she removed her thick coat from the cabin. She spread it carefully on the forest floor, hoping it would give the tiny creatures warmth and comfort. The 3 little beings hesitated at first, unsure what to make of her. Then, as if sensing her calm and steady presence, they slowly moved toward her. One pressed its small hand against her ankle, another huddled against her coat, and the smallest whimpered softly, curling into a trembling ball. Charlotte's chest tightened. She had never felt such vulnerability, such fragile dependence, all at once. Gently, she scooped up the smallest one first, cradling it close. Its tiny arms instinctively wrapped around her wrist, and it rested its head against her forearm. The other two followed, one clinging to her shoulders, the other nestling against her chest. She could feel their rapid, weak heartbeats against her own, and for a moment, the world shrank to just them, the three little lives she had found, and the determination rising inside her to protect them. The walk back to her cabin was slow and careful. Each step required balance, not just for herself, but to ensure the babies remained secure. The creatures made small, soft noises, some whimpers, some uncertain coos, but none panicked. Charlotte whispered softly to them all the way, her voice low and soothing. By the time she reached her cabin, Charlotte was exhausted, but the fatigue was nothing compared to the relief she felt. She set the little ones gently onto a pile of blankets she had prepared. They clung to each other, eyes wide and trusting, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to smile. The bond had formed instantly, an unspoken understanding that she would care for them, and they would lean on her in return. Charlotte stepped back for a moment and looked at them, her heart full of both awe and responsibility. She realized that this encounter, so unexpected and extraordinary, was not merely a fleeting event. It was the start of a journey, one that would test her patience, her courage, and in ways she could not yet understand, her capacity to love beyond anything she had ever known. The forest, as if acknowledging the moment, seemed quieter than usual, the early morning light soft against the trees. Charlotte knew, deep in her heart, that nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Charlotte's cabin was quiet that evening, the soft orange glow of the stove filling the room. She had arranged blankets in a warm corner, creating a small nest for the three little creatures. Each baby clung to the edge of the pile, their dark eyes wide and curious. Watching her every movement, she knelt slowly, keeping her hands open and steady. The smallest shivered violently, and without thinking, Charlotte scooped it up, holding it close to her chest. Its tiny hands gripped her sweater, and it nuzzled against her warmth. She could feel its fragile heartbeat pressing against her own, and a deep, unshakable sense of responsibility settled over her. The second baby moved hesitantly toward her, its large, round eyes studying her face. Charlotte spoke softly, whispering words she didn't think they could understand, but the tone mattered more than the language. The creature tilted its head, as though sensing the promise in her voice, and eventually curled up beside her on the blankets. The third, taller than the others, remained on the edge, still wary. It watched her with a careful curiosity, testing her patience, gauging her intentions. Charlotte sat quietly, giving it time, letting the silence carry reassurance. Gradually, the creature inched closer, finally resting its head on her knee. All around them, the forest seemed unusually still. No wind rustled the trees, no birds called out. It was as if the world had paused, holding its breath in acknowledgement of the fragile trust forming in that small corner of the cabin. Charlotte stayed with them for hours, her presence steady and calm. She offered small amounts of water and soft ground food she had prepared earlier. The babies accepted it hesitantly, but more importantly, they stayed close, letting her touch them without fear. As night deepened, the three little creatures finally relaxed into sleep, their breathing soft and even. Charlotte leaned back against the wall, exhausted but profoundly moved. She realized that this first night had established a bond far stronger than she could have imagined. The forest outside whispered gently through the cabin walls, a reminder that she was no longer alone. In the quiet, Charlotte made a silent promise. She would protect them, no matter what. And somehow she felt certain that the forest, too, had taken note. Late that night, long after the babies had fallen into a fragile sleep, Charlotte heard a sound that made her freeze. Heavy footsteps, low, deliberate, and unlike anything she had heard before, approached the cabin from the forest. Her heart quickened, not from fear, but from a strange anticipation she could not explain. She moved quietly to the door, and opened it just a crack. The cold night air rushed in, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. And then she saw her, a towering, graceful figure emerging from the shadows of the trees. The female Bigfoot, the mother of the 3 babies, stood there, her fur dark but streaked with silver and her eyes large, deep, and intelligent, locked onto Charlotte. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. The mother was injured, limping slightly, and yet there was no anger or threat in her presence. Instead, there was recognition. Slowly, the Bigfoot approached, sniffing the air between them. She moved closer to the cabin, her gaze fixed on the 3 tiny forms nestled in the blankets. Charlotte knelt down, keeping her hands visible and steady. She whispered softly, not knowing if the mother could understand her words, but hoping the tone would reach her. The female Bigfoot's massive hand lifted briefly, almost in hesitation, then gently tapped the ground near the babies. She sniffed each one, brushing her fingers lightly against their small heads. The mother then turned her eyes to Charlotte. In a movement both deliberate and tender, she tapped her chest twice, a gesture Charlotte would never forget. It was a silent message of gratitude, acknowledgement of the care Charlotte had given her children. Without another sound, the mother carefully scooped up the babies, holding them close. Charlotte watched, her heart full, as the 3 little ones nestled into her arms as if they had always belonged there. The mother lingered for a moment, eyes meeting Charlotte's one last time, and then she slowly disappeared into the dark forest. Moving with a grace that belied her size, Charlotte closed the door and leaned against it, feeling a mixture of relief, awe, and profound emotion. She knew, in a way she could not explain, that a bond had formed not just with the babies, but with the mother as well. The forest seemed to hum around her, a quiet acknowledgement of the extraordinary connection that had been made. From that night on, Charlotte understood something she had never known before. Kindness, once given, has a way of coming back to you, in ways both quiet and extraordinary. The years that followed passed quietly, almost peacefully, yet Charlotte never forgot the 3 tiny creatures she had rescued. Life settled back into a familiar rhythm. She continued her morning walks through the forest, tending to her small garden, and spending long evenings reading by the fire. The cabin remained her sanctuary, yet the memory of that extraordinary night lingered like a gentle hum beneath the ordinary sounds of life. Though she never saw the 3 babies again in person, their presence was often felt. Charlotte began noticing small, subtle signs in and around her cabin, tiny tokens left in the snow or among the fallen leaves. A neatly arranged pile of smooth stones, fresh pine branches, or an unexpected bundle of wild berries appeared on her doorstep or by the edge of her garden. Each time, her heart lifted. She understood instantly who had left them, and the unspoken message filled her with warmth. They had not forgotten her. Charlotte often wondered about their lives in the forest. Were they thriving? Did they remember her as clearly as she remembered them? Sometimes, late at night, she imagined their voices softly echoing through the trees, or the gentle rustle of their movements among the branches. The thought brought both comfort and longing, a reminder that her actions had rippled outward in ways she could not fully comprehend. Despite the calm of these years, Charlotte remained quietly vigilant. She always ensured her cabin was safe, her garden well tended, and her path through the forest clear. Occasionally, she would catch glimpses of shadows moving at the far edge of the woods, fleeting shapes that vanished as quickly as they appeared. She never pursued them. She knew some connections were meant to remain a quiet mystery, felt rather than seen. And then on certain mornings, when frost covered the ground and the air was still, Charlotte would find another small gift left just for her, carefully placed stones, a delicate arrangement of leaves or berries glistening in the sunlight. Each time, it reminded her that the bond she had formed in that single night had endured. The forest, in its own silent way, had acknowledged her kindness. And Charlotte, though she lived her days quietly and alone, carried a profound truth in her heart. Even in the stillest moments of life, the echoes of love and care could return to her years later, in ways she could never have imagined. Years had passed since Charlotte first rescued the 3 baby Bigfoots, and she had grown more comfortable with the rhythm of her quiet life. She had reached 52, her hair streaked with silver, her movements slower but still steady. On one particularly cold winter evening, she decided to gather firewood for the night. The forest was hushed under a thin layer of snow, the air sharp and crisp, and the world seemed frozen in stillness. Charlotte moved carefully along the familiar path, her boots crunching lightly in the frost. She had always been cautious, but that day, the ice beneath the thin layer of snow betrayed her. One foot slipped, then the other, and suddenly she was on the ground, her hip twisting painfully beneath her. A sharp, blinding pain shot through her side, and she realized immediately that she could not stand. She tried to crawl toward the cabin, dragging herself slowly along the icy ground. But each movement sent waves of agony through her body. The forest, normally a place of calm and comfort, now felt immense and indifferent. Snow began to fall more heavily, coating her already chilled body. The wind whispered through the bare branches, cutting across her face like icy knives. She was alone. For the first time in years, a sense of helplessness crept over her, a fear that she might not make it back to her cabin, that the long night could overwhelm her. Charlotte tried to steady her breathing, willing herself to remain calm, but the pain and cold made every second feel eternal. Her eyes scanned the snow-covered forest, seeking some sign of help, some familiar shape, but there was nothing. The quiet she had once loved now pressed against her like a weight dot as the hours crept by. Exhaustion began to take over. Charlotte's hands trembled, her vision blurred, and she realized that she might have to spend the night in the snow. Panic threatened to rise, but deep inside, a tiny flicker of hope remained. Somehow, someway, she trusted that she was not entirely alone in these woods, that the forest held memories far older and kinder than the frostbitten. Fear surrounding her. Little did she know, the same creatures she had once rescued years ago had not forgotten her. Their time had come. They were near, moving quietly through the trees. Sensing her distress, ready to repay the bond that had once saved their lives, Charlotte lay in the snow, shivering, pain radiating through her hip, unable to move. The forest around her seemed endless, the trees like towering sentinels indifferent to her struggle. She tried to take a shallow breath, her body stiff, and closed her eyes for a brief moment, silently hoping someone or something might come to her aid. Then, faint at first, came the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, different from any human stride she had ever heard. She opened her eyes slowly, the dim gray light of the fading afternoon revealing movement through the trees. 3 massive figures emerged from the shadows, moving with careful precision. Her heart leapt, though she could hardly comprehend what she saw. The 3 beings were the very same creatures she had rescued years ago, now grown into towering young Bigfoots. Their fur had darkened, thickened, and streaks of silver ran along their shoulders, a sign of both age and resilience. Despite their size, there was a gentleness in their approach, a recognition that ran deeper than time. One of them knelt carefully beside her, placing a massive yet gentle arm beneath her shoulders. Another gathered a warm pelt from the forest floor and wrapped it around her, shielding her from the biting wind. The third moved ahead slightly, stepping through the snow with care, clearing a path so Charlotte could be carried safely. She could hardly believe her eyes, yet a sense of calm washed over her. The fear that had gripped her moments ago began to ease as the creature's intent became clear. They remembered her. They remembered the nights she had spent nurturing them when they were helpless. Charlotte leaned into the arms supporting her, feeling the steady warmth and strength beneath her. The forest around them seemed to quiet further, as if giving space to this reunion. She whispered softly, almost to herself, gratitude spilling from her lips. Though she knew the creatures would not understand the words, only the tone. Carefully, they lifted her, moving with an effortless grace despite their size. Each step was deliberate, careful not to jostle her fragile frame. It was a scene of loyalty and memory in motion, a repayment of kindness that had never been forgotten. Charlotte felt an overwhelming mixture of awe, relief, and deep emotional connection. For the first time in hours, she knew she was truly safe, carried not by strangers, but by beings whose lives she had once touched and who had in turn come to protect hers. Charlotte could hardly take in what was happening. The three grown Bigfoots, once the tiny creatures she had rescued years before, now carried her effortlessly through the snow toward her cabin. Every step was careful, precise, as if they understood exactly how fragile she was. Their movements were steady and deliberate, showing a balance of strength and gentleness that left her in awe. Once inside the cabin, they did not stop to rest. One Bigfoot moved to the woodpile, selecting a sturdy branch and carefully bringing it to the fireplace. With surprising dexterity, it positioned the branch so that a small flame caught, igniting the fire and filling the room with warmth. Another Bigfoot went to the corner where Charlotte usually kept a small stash of water and food. It brought her water in a hollowed-out container and placed it beside her, while also offering soft food. It had gathered berries and nuts she did not recognize, yet which smelled sweet and nourishing. The third Bigfoot remained close to Charlotte, sitting silently beside her, its large hand resting gently near her shoulder. She could feel the strength and protection in its presence. It was as if they remembered every hour of care, every gentle word, every soft touch she had given them as helpless babies. Their actions were deliberate, patient, and filled with gratitude, a repayment of kindness she had given long ago. Without expecting anything in return, Charlotte watched them quietly, her heart swelling with a mixture of wonder, relief, and profound emotion. She realized that she had not just saved three baby Bigfoots that night so many years ago. She had formed a bond that had endured the passage of time, one that had matured into loyalty, intelligence, and an unspoken understanding of care. They worked in silence, never making a sound that could be mistaken for threat. Every movement was meant to help her, to restore her warmth and safety. When the fire burned steadily, when water and food were close, and when she was settled comfortably against blankets, the Bigfoots finally paused. One leaned down, gently nudging her hand with its massive fingers, almost as if to say, "We remember. We are here for you." Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes, a mixture of gratitude and awe she could not put into words. In that quiet, snowy cabin, the years of solitude, the memories of kindness, and the unwavering loyalty of the creatures she had once saved came together in a single unforgettable moment. She knew then that the forest held more than mystery. It held the memory of compassion, and it had returned to her in the most extraordinary way possible. Weeks later, after Charlotte had fully recovered from her injury, she walked slowly to the edge of the forest. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the snow, and the air was crisp and still. Every step reminded her of the night she had first rescued the three tiny creatures, now grown, now strong, now standing silently in the distance. The three Bigfoots watched her from the tree line, their massive frames still yet commanding. There was no rush, no urgency, only calm observation. Charlotte stopped a few feet away, feeling the depth of the connection that had endured all these years. She lifted her hand slowly, a simple gesture of gratitude. For a long moment, the forest was quiet except for the soft crunch of snow beneath her boots. The three Bigfoots shifted slightly, their eyes never leaving hers. Charlotte could feel their awareness, their memory, and the unspoken bond that had formed through years of distance and care. Then, without a sound, they turned and walked back into the forest. Their movements were deliberate, calm, and measured. They did not look back again, but the presence lingered, a silent promise that the bond shared between them had not faded, that the memory of kindness had endured. Charlotte remained at the edge of the forest for several minutes, watching until they disappeared completely into the shadows. She felt a quiet peace settle over her. The forest, once only a backdrop to her solitary life, had become a place of profound connection, memory, and gratitude. She whispered softly to herself, a smile tugging at her lips. People think the wild is full of danger, but sometimes it remembers your kindness. The snow drifted lightly around her, and Charlotte turned back toward her cabin, carrying with her a deep understanding. The smallest acts of care, given without expectation, can echo through time, returning in ways more extraordinary than anyone could imagine. Charlotte sat by her cabin window, watching the forest stretch endlessly before her. The snow was melting in patches, revealing the quiet green beneath. She thought about the 3 Bigfoots, now fully grown, and the extraordinary bond that had formed all those years ago. A bond that had endured time, distance, and silence. She reflected on how life had changed her. The forest had once been a place of solitude, a sanctuary from the world. Now it held memory, loyalty, and the quiet presence of beings who had returned her kindness in ways she could never have imagined. Every gift left at her doorstep, every careful gesture of protection during her time of danger, reminded her that the simplest acts of care can create ripples far beyond what the eye can see. Charlotte smiled softly. She realized that the forest, and the creatures within it, had taught her something profound. Kindness, once given, is never lost. It waits quietly, sometimes for years, until it finds a way to return. As she gazed at the trees swaying gently in the evening breeze, Charlotte felt a deep sense of peace. She understood that life's quiet moments, the ones often overlooked, hold the most extraordinary stories. Her heart was full, not just with the memory of those she had helped, but with the reassurance that the world, even in its wildest corners, could remember and repay love. And in that silence, Charlotte whispered to herself one last time, I did not just save 3 lives. They saved mine in return. The forest remained still, as if listening, and Charlotte knew that she would never truly be alone again.